This is a test of frequency instruments, bass, drums, distortion.
Well, folks, it's time to kick it old school.
Am I just never going to get out again? Is it going to go on for another year? So I can see why it's good psychologically as well to give people a little bit of help and hope.
But I think the really important thing with that is that I think one of the things that we know that people who are shielding, and actually as well those people that sort of sit in that group below, the clinically vulnerable, if not extremely so, what actually they really want now is more information and more clarity going forward, because I think we could all accept that, you know, a lot of things were rushed out in a hurry when we were at the very beginning of this emergency, but now we're moving into a phase where we are starting to look at, well, how are we going to live with this for the foreseeable future, and how are we going to support those people who are very vulnerable to this virus for the foreseeable future? And that raises all sorts of questions, especially as perhaps society more widely starts to get back to work, get back to school. So there's some really important questions there, and I think there's something that certainly organisations like ours would know that older people who this affects want to see more clarity, they would like more guidance, and they'd like to get a sense of where things are going and what support they're going to be able to get in order them to be able to live as well as possible during this time.
Absolutely. I mean, there clearly is a problem with communication, a slight lack of clarity. I've had calls this evening from people a bit confused about it. We had a call just before the news from somebody saying they've had 3 different letters from the NHS with different dates about when they have to shield until. They're clinically shielding, but they're not extremely vulnerable. I don't know, and they're now confused as to whether they should still be taking notice of that letter or not. And there are other people who have had the letter saying on no account go out. They've literally had it 2 days ago, and then they're told by the government yesterday, well, you can go out. So it's no wonder people are confused.
Absolutely, I think there's a lot of confusion out there, not least of all because we have these 2 different groups and people, and we know, for example, that lots of...
Can you just explain those 2 different groups?
Absolutely. So there's a group which are considered to be extremely clinically vulnerable, and so that's the group who've been asked to shield, essentially, and that includes people who might have specific types of cancers, they might have had an organ transplant, so there's lots of conditions where their immune system is basically very suppressed.
And they're the ones who will have had a letter saying don't go out.
Who've been asked to shield, but of course, as we've learned more about the virus as we've gone on, that group has changed a little bit because scientists have realised the evidence has suggested that actually there are perhaps some groups who weren't originally included, but perhaps ought to be now that they know more. Then there's a group underneath, there's a sort of a second tier where people are considered to be clinically vulnerable. So we know that they are more at risk of having a severe illness if they contract the virus, but they're not as at such high risk. But that group is quite a large group, and for example includes everybody over the age of 70. So it really
how does anybody know that they're in that group?
So that group, so these are set out.
You just decide that yourself. You don't have a letter from the NHS saying you're clinical.
You don't. You won't receive a letter from the NHS saying you're clinically vulnerable, although of course you may have discussed this with your GP or your nurse or somebody like that. But there are a list, and of course we've provided lots of information about this on our HK website because we know it's been quite confusing. So we would, of course, urge people to come and have a look at that. There is a full list. But it includes people, for example, who are living with COPD, and as I said, everybody over the age of 70, people with other conditions, heart conditions, things that might make it more difficult to recover if they did contract the virus.
And how much help do you think is usefully available to people in these situations? Again, I had a call not long ago from somebody saying they had COPD, they're not meant to go out, they are on the list, but they lived in a remote part of Cornwall, and the only way he could get any supplies was to go out shopping.
It has been incredibly challenging for an awful lot of people. I think that's certainly something we've seen through our own work at Age UK. We've seen an unprecedented level of demand for all of our services, really, for everything across the board, because people were sort of, well, what do you do in this situation? So. Yeah. And there has been a huge effort both amongst charities, absolutely, local government, the NHS to mobilise as much support as they can. But of course, I think like a lot of things, you know, it was such a scramble in the very beginning to try and to get everything in place in the emergency that, you know, I think there have been people who've fallen through the gaps. I mean, we've certainly come across people as Age UK through our services who have fallen between the gaps, like the gentleman that you mentioned, and actually they haven't had the support from family and friends. They haven't been able to get on the right list, or it's been difficult, for example, to get on a priority list for a shopping slot, or if they are eligible, they don't necessarily have access to the internet anyway. So it's been a very, very difficult time. I think the question now is now we know perhaps what we're facing for the foreseeable future, how do we try and make sure that we put in place a much more secure platform of support for the people who are going to need it long term?
Absolutely, and that is beginning to happen. I think, Ruth, great to talk to you. Thank you very much. Ruth Eiston there from Age UK. And your calls, more coming in a moment. 0345 6060 973, LBC at 8:16.
This is LBC.
When it comes to finding something new, you can start the conversation at Hello You. Sign up and browse profiles for free at helloyoudating.com and start the conversation today.
We're all juggling a lot at the moment. Take me. I'd normally be making a documentary right now, but at home, I've had to become my parents' questionable IT consultant, a glitchy virtual colleague, and a distinctly average quiz show host. Which is why BT assembled some of the nation's favourite faces for a series of tech how-tos on homeschooling, digital well-being, working from home, online safety, video calling, and more. To watch these guys,